Why, good morning. You probably noticed that I haven't, posted anything for quite a long time. And, well, there's just one little explanation as to why. If you haven't noticed, I have been playing a video game that's really captivated me and you could even say stolen my time. The one and only Project Zomboid. A gigantic survival crafting zombie exploration simulator. It is also isometric, so you would have to be very careful, especially when you, jump off a building. But don't worry, despite the game being isometric, you could still see quite a bit, depending on what traits that you have. Now, this evil ass little game has stolen so much of my time, especially whenever I would get off work and I don't really have much else better to do. Not to mention, since you can kind of tell, I have ran out of several, video ideas. But that's okay. Better something than none, shall I say. Now let me give you a little bit of a summarization as to, what this whole entire game is about. You are stuck in a zombie-ridden area of Kentucky, also referred to as Knox Country, which has been quarantined, or I guess you could say attempted quarantine, by the government. And so then, the protagonist, which is you, comes in. You could choose your occupation, your appearance, and traits before selecting to spawn within one of the 4 starting towns: Rosewood, Muldrow, West Point, and Riverside. There is also Louisville, but you can't select it as a spawn point. Instead, it serves as an endgame map for the other players to continue if they have nothing better to do. And so, you go into the city and you get your own home. And guess what? There is zombies everywhere. Everywhere you go, everywhere you walk, and especially everywhere that you run. And what if I told you something that makes them even more terrifying? Something that most zombie games don't really implement, which is kind of shocking to me, but this one somehow does it so perfectly well in my opinion. And it's the fact that if you get bitten once, your character dies. There is no cure, and your death is basically inevitable. But even though your character does die, you as a player know how to survive better with your next character. And so, we shall get into more details onto this game soon enough. Honestly, I don't even have an intro, I'm just kind of winging it at this point. But hey, as you can see, I am slowly starting to not give a So enjoy this cute little video that I made, and you could say that this is actually my first gaming video. Hooray, whoopee-doo, I have traversed into the dark side of YouTube. But it's not like I'm gonna be lying to you guys, because if I'm being perfectly honest, blame this game as to the reason as to why I have not been posting much. Anyways, thank you all for coming by today, and I hope you all enjoy this video. Let us begin our adventure. The game was originally created in 2013 by IndieStone, and in my honest opinion, I kind of prefer indie games in comparison to most AAAs because, well, they know how to make their fans happy, unlike some of those other frickin' developers. And interesting enough, the game used to look way different in comparison to how it is now. It was essentially a Sims 1 clone, but with gore and zombies. And interesting enough, a little story that actually is presented into this world. But it's mostly a tutorial, as well as being part of an alpha tech demo. So the plot of it being that there was these 2 survivors named Bob Smith and his wife, Kate Smith. And just to be clear, Bob is the guy that's basically onto the cover art, as well as the, entrance to the title screen. He's also a middle-aged man who is unemployed in the past. He doesn't have any special skills, but he's fairly good at improvising. Kinda like everyone else in the zombie world. So he's fairly relatable, or I guess you could say the default, go-to guy. In the story, he's an optimistic man who does all that he can to make sure that his wife is safe and alive. He is also initially seen with a blue sweater and black pants. Now, the story between these two is that Bob and Kate get stuck in a city place under quarantine, and they have been on the run from zombies ever since the quarantine was put up. It is learned that this quarantined city is Knox County. The tutorial storyline begins with Bob and Kate in the tutorial home. Kate recently broke her leg while running from raiders or zombies. So the couple had to set up a safe house in a nearby home. In the home, Bob places the injured Kate onto a bed, and then the gameplay begins. Immediately after putting Kate onto the bed, Bob decides to treat Kate's wounds. After helping Kate, Bob goes to the shed and he finds a hammer, as well as 10 planks and 60 nails. Bob then decides to board up the home with planks to protect him and his wife from zombies, as well as other adversaries. After boarding up the home, he rests until 9 AM the next day. After waking up, he goes out to gather food and supplies. While gathering the food supplies, he successfully fights the kitchen zombie and he finds himself some soup. When he returns home, he cooks the soup and eats it. And after eating it, he hears a broadcast, and a raider invades his home after the broadcast. And it's up to you if you let the raider defeat you, or if you successfully defend yourself. If you do defeat the raider, you take the raider's shotgun and a baseball bat, and then you survive in the zombie world. And there is also a much darker, option that you can do. You can use a pillow found in a wardrobe to smother Kate and put her out of her misery. This in turn ends the tutorial, and shockingly enough, it can be used as a tutorial skip function when you're activating it on top of Kate. Bob also has the capacity to carry weight up to 300 pounds, or I guess you could say units is often assumed, which means Bob's got guns. So really, that's the only kind of story that you could ever get from Project Zomboid, at least for right now before they start releasing more updates. Meaning that Project Zomboid doesn't really have a story to it, it's just a survivor simulator, but with zombies. And another very intriguing thing about this tutorial is that the, raiders, right? They are not common into the current base game. And I guess you could say the closest thing that you can get to an actual raider is those toxic PvPers that you can sometimes come across. So really, as far as I know, they are not an actual enemy. They are just the tutorial enemy, I guess. But with that out of the way, let us fast forward into time quite a bit. With several updates, several tweaks, several animations, several stuff being added into the game. And even after several years going by, this game is somehow still not finished. I mean, correct me if I am wrong, but it's still barely in beta, if it even is in beta, or I guess you could say an unstable beta. I mean, Christ, imagine how this game is going to turn out if Build 100 ever comes in the next 20-30 years. But hey, regardless of the game not being finished, there is still so much packed into this one game. So much stuff that you can do, so much flexibility, so much stuff that you can just have. Not to mention the amount of weaponry that you can use, the amount of stuff that you can make, the amount of food that you can consume. It's almost endless. And another thing that I should mention is I highly recommend playing this game with other people, or I guess you could say in a multiplayer server, because if you go solo, you're gonna be very lonely, let me tell you that. Plus, it makes finding survivors a lot more satisfying if you ask me. But if you find a PvPer, you got two options. Get a gun, blast him. Or, if you see him, run the hell away. Because the moment that you see them bones next to that name, you know that they're gonna be trouble. Anyways, before I go off track any further, let me walk you through this game just a little bitty bit. So when you go to solo or join or whatever it may be, depending on what you're trying to do, you have a select few options as to how you want your playstyle. You have Apocalypse, Survivor, Builder, and Custom Sandbox. Apocalypse and Survivor are fairly similar, but as far as I know, Apocalypse is just a little bit more difficult and it has more, scarcity when it comes to items. Builder is basically, well, self-explanatory. I mean, you could just build whatever you want. It's like creative mode for Minecraft. And then you got Custom Sandbox, which is personally my favorite, because there's so much flexibility that you could basically put into your own world. You can make loot respawn, you can have zombies faster, you could do all sorts of crazy, goofy stuff with it. And if you're basically brand new to the game, or if you're trying to get into it, I highly recommend going to Custom Sandbox, setting the spawn rate for zombies as low, make loot respawn so that way you can actually, get more items and stuff, and see how it feels when you're playing it. Because believe you and me, if you go headfirst into Apocalypse or Survivor, you're gonna get your ass completely kicked, especially if you're brand new to the game. You also got these other challenges if you really want to make your head hurt. I mean, you got really CDDA, you got Storm Coming, House in the Woods, and a bunch of other stuff too if you want to try those out. Plus there's also mods too if you're interested in that. Now for this run, I'm just gonna make myself a throwaway character, you know, nothing fancy. I'm basically gonna die if I get into it, but I'll just basically show you how it goes. Now you can see here that you have several occupations with their own nice little perks, their own traits, and their own, I guess you could say, disadvantages that you can have for your own character. You could be a police officer, you could be a burger maker, you could be a carpenter, a burglar, or whatever you would like to be. However, there is also a catch. The more traits and the more good stuff and buffs that you give your character, the more that you're gonna have to select negative features. So for example, if you choose to get strong, which is an amazing perk in my opinion, and it saves you a ton of grinding, you're gonna have to spend -10 onto a negative trait to help balance this character. So for this demonstration, I'm just gonna show a throwaway character, you know, one that's obviously gonna die, but it also has a couple of good things to help back them up in case of whatever. I would go more into detail as to how like all of these traits work, but you could just kind of look it up yourself so that way I could save you the lecture. Now for this character, I'm gonna go with obese, out of shape, and clumsy. Yeah, those are awful, but but it's just an example. It's nothing to take serious. And for my positives, I'm gonna go with Fast Healer, which isn't a bad perk in my opinion in case you wrap something up and you want it healed 20% faster. Organized, you know, more inventory space if you got a backpack. Stout, a little bit of extra strength so you can carry a little more. And Thick Skin, which I think is kind of underrated. I mean, if you're a newbie, I recommend it, but like if you're really good at the game and if you don't get touched, then you don't really need it. I mean, especially since it's 8. I mean, if it was like a -6, I would probably take it a lot, but since it's an 8, I mean, that's a little bit too much points, but whatever. And then you are shown that you can make your own character, aka Sim, and I'm just gonna try my best to make him look like Wingo. And once you're done with your own character, you could just travel into the world or a server or wherever it is that you wish to go and see how long you last, basically. Now, whenever you hop into a game, you're greeted with a little bit of a tutorial. It kind of shows you, you know, a little bit of basics, what you're supposed to do and how to survive and all that junk. I always skip it personally, but it's always nice to, you know, take a little browse at. And you could also see your stats on the left and all of your other stuff. And I can't run for jack, so I'm gonna get eaten up really fast. But the game basically rewards you if you continue to grind these stats, and technically you can actually get all of them to 10. But that would just take several weeks to do, you know, given the situation and what you might have. Now the first thing that you always want to do is whenever you spawn into a home, look around and take whatever it is that you want. And if you find something that you can use as a weapon, use it, whether it be a rolling pin, a frying pan, a fork, whatever. The game can surprisingly be very creative, and you can too. Oh yeah, and don't forget to drink up and get food. And interesting enough, the game has this thing where you have a certain amount of weeks or months before the power and the water go out, because I think the in-game lore is that there's still like a quarantine going on, right? So they're still gonna have a lot of these things set up and running for buildings. And if you find books, I always highly recommend reading them. You also have an option to skip time too, so that way you're not just standing there bored. However, the game kind of punishes you for it. I mean, if you stick around for too long, zombies are definitely gonna try and jump your ass. So really, like I said, find yourself a weapon, which is something that I would prefer to prioritize, especially since zombies in this game are ruthless, sneaky monsters. One bite and it's basically over for you. Granted, you can like wear stuff, you can wear certain armor or certain layers of clothing to help reduce your chances of getting bit or, you know, even being harmed at all. But it's just so much better if you just don't get grabbed. I mean, for real. Because armor ain't gonna mean jack if you got friggin' 4 of them, you know, hopping on you and just munching away. Cause you're dead at that point. Even though you can be strong and you can, you know, have accessible tools to deal with zombies, always be careful of crowds and always look behind you. The game also has this very unique mechanic, which is basically your perception radius. what you can see is where your character is facing. So in short, keep your eyes peeled, always look behind you or else, you might get bit. Now, as you can keep on going through house after house after house, you might end up having a big horde coming after you. So if you have higher fitness than what my character does, which is 1, the best thing that I highly recommend to do is walk away. Because if you run, you're only going to attract more attention, so the best thing that you could do is power walk, break line of sight, maybe go behind a house, have the zombies break on the windows and doors, that way you can actually give them the slip. Not to mention, if you run too much, you're going to get very tired, you're going to move very slowly, the undead are going to catch up to you, and you die.
Just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
So that's basically the premise of the game itself. Now, here's the next thing. You can make yourself a brand new character. You can have them, do a different class, an occupation, or whatever you may call it. My preference is unemployed because I don't have to worry about flaws and stuff. I can mostly just grind for it, but I'm not really going to have too many positives. I probably choose to get obese or unfit because you can actually make those traits go away, but they're very difficult. You just have to run a lot, don't get eaten, don't get killed by zombies, and eventually it'll be extremely rewarding, especially if you get yourself, a couple of good traits to help back you up. You can also pick some panic traits as well. The one I specifically recommend is Cowardly. The reason I recommend it is because it's a -2, but the game has this very interesting mechanic to where the longer that you survive, which up to 150 days, the more desensitized you become to zombies. So really, after a while, your character just doesn't really even care, and they become so used to the zombies that they're not going to achieve that state of panic. So like I said, very rewarding, but it's also very difficult in the beginning. If you're going to go for any kind of character build, I recommend just going for an average Joe one. I mean, at least for the beginning anyways. Unless you're highly experienced and you know exactly what to do, or if you spawn into a safe house that's gonna ensure that you're not gonna die. Because believe you and me, this game is gonna do everything that it can to screw you over. And it sneaks up on you and it takes advantage of your perception radius as well. No joke, you could literally be looting a corpse, but the next second later, a zombie's gonna come right behind you and try and grab you. However, if you got the weapons for it, you can thankfully defend yourself against these zombies. And when you're fighting these zombies, specifically in melee combat, I highly recommend fighting up to 2 of them at a time. Mostly because if you fight more than 2, the third one might catch up to you and sneak a quick bite in. Now, if you do come across guns, and if you have a lot of ammo to spare, they will dispatch these creatures a lot easier. Although you kinda need to grind the aiming stat, because when you first wield a gun, and if you ain't got nothing in it, it's gonna be very brutal at first. But if you push a zombie to the ground, and if you stand on top of them, then you could shoot them a lot easier and grind that stat. Now the reason why I'm covering combat so much is because it's gonna be very common in your playthrough. Regardless of what you are going to do in your game, you're gonna have to kill zombies to make things simpler for you. So a little strat that I always recommend is, if you have a first character within a server, kill as many zombies as you can within your area, so that way when you spawn back with a different character, you don't have to worry about as much. Because once most of the zombies are cleared and they're not, hopping on your face all the time, you actually have a lot of room to do other things within the game. Which brings me to another very interesting and wonderful mechanic that this game has, or shall I say mechanics. The game potentially allows you to have infinite survivability. For example, if you make a campfire and if you have a bucket of water or a cooking pot, go to a river, fill it up, go to the campfire and then boil it so that way you can have fresh water. And if you keep repeating that process and if you have multiple buckets to spare, then you can have infinite water potentially. If you need to make an axe so that way you could cut down some trees, start with a stone axe by foraging on the road to find chipstone and tree branches so that way you could put 2 and 2 together so that you can actually chop stuff down. So you got water and you got a campfire and you potentially have enough wood to spare. But next comes the food. Where do you get it? How do you get it? Well, as far as I know, there's two ways that you can do it. You could go around a bunch of homes and you could find canned goods or fresh foods if able. Or you could find a fishing pole and or crafted spear and go fishing. Fishing, in my opinion, is probably the most efficient way to get food. Based on the level of your skill, it could take quite a long time, but I can assure you that it's very rewarding. So then if you do catch a fish, you could turn it into a fillet, place it onto a campfire and or frying pan and stir fry it, cook it, and there you go, you got fresh food. But if you do want to take things to another level, I first highly recommend getting yourself a safe home. You can only claim one home at a time, but you are free to switch to whatever. Once you do find yourself a home, the one thing I always recommend trying to look for is a generator. They can sometimes be found in sheds, garages, etc. However, they need gas to perform. They also need to be repaired, but you can use scrap electronics to help that. You can also find gas cans, which is something that you are going to need if you want to siphon out gas from cars and or gas pumps. Gas is probably one of the most important resources in the game, because with it you could use it for generators and cars, which helps a lot with traveling. Believe you and me. That's another thing as well, traveling and or cars. Depending on what server that you are on, you are going to come across a lot of vehicles, some of which with different parts, different batteries, different engines, and all that. Cars can be repaired, but they require a lot of parts, a lot of tools, and a lot of mechanics leveling. But if you ever do get yourself a well-functioning car, hoo boy, it just makes life so much easier. You can take one with you for raids, you can go out of town with it, you can make long road trips and all that kind of stuff. And depending on what vehicle you have, you can also get a lot of carrying capacity. Meaning if you want to go onto a fishing trip and get yourself a bunch of fish, just stuff it into the trunk and bring it back home. Or if you want to take a drive around homes, you could swipe up a bunch of cans, fill them up in your trunk, and then you could just head on back. You can also do that with police stations and all sorts of other supplies that you need. So let's just say that you have all of these wonderful supplies, right? You got food, you got weapons, you got water, you got generators, you got gas, you got everything that you need. But some people may wonder, what exactly is the ending or conclusion for this game? Well, to be completely honest with you, this game doesn't really have an ending, at least not yet anyways. But there is this one place that you can go to if you wish to explore more endgame content, and the city is known as Louisville. Within Knox County, it is currently the largest settlement in Project Zomboid's map, with multiple different suburbs ranging from tall high-rises to more seedy rundown districts. As a major urban area, it has many commercial areas with massive amounts of supplies to be had. But it comes with a catch, and it's the fact that it has a proportionally high population count, meaning that the area is going to be swarming with zombies. So if you want a death wish, or at least try to get some good loot, I recommend going to Louisville, but make sure that you are carrying a ton of guns, because you're definitely going to need them. And as far as I know, Louisville has been recently added a few months ago, so it's not like it's been there for a while, it's actually new. But yeah, if you got yourself a ride and some decent loot to help back you up, go ahead and go to Louisville and see how it goes for you. Meanwhile, I'm just gonna isolate myself from everybody and live on a farm, because my preferred playstyle is to, you know, survive. In conclusion, well, I guess there isn't really much of one. Project Zomboid is a fantastic zombie simulator, and it's got content up the ass, so you have plenty of time to enjoy it with your pals. And yeah, I know that I've been slacking a lot on content and all, but come on, give a guy a break. I work 40 a week and it's not like this is a job for me or anything. But anyways, with that being said, thank you all for coming on to this video and I hope that you all enjoyed it. This took a bit to make, and I might make more videos like this in the future depending on what I find and what I'm interested in, if that makes sense. But anyways, with that being said, thank you all for watching this video today. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, and I hope you all have yourselves a good night.